I think if you want assistance from VICPP in lining up visits, maybe it's tomorrow or maybe it's next week, you have my email. If you don't, I'll throw it in the chat. Please reach out. I would love to help you do that. And I can go and harangue these legislative aides in person because I'm down here in Richmond. So feel free to let me know. I will, oh, sure. I see a question around how to direct the conversation and control the time, which I am happy to answer, or Katie, you can as well. You've been handling this half, so.
It depends on your temperament, right? It depends on who was it that asked this question? Because they might have a good answer. April, go ahead. I want you to answer this question.
Well, I don't necessarily have a good answer because I don't have a whole lot of direct experience interacting with legislators, but just speaking from the student perspective, I can see how this can be a very intimidating thing to do, especially for people who, not to say it's confrontational, but it can almost feel that way when you're trying to bring somebody back on topic. And so I think just giving maybe even some tips on language to use, like how do you say that professionally and appropriately?
Sure.
One thing that I would start off with, and again, in an earlier life, I worked a lot with politicians. They are human beings. Just remember that. They are sometimes the dorky dads and the dorky moms of your friends, right? Like, you have to remember that sometimes we put people on a pedestal. And so think of them as a human being that is supposed to, their job is to represent you, just like your job in the future might be to be their social worker, right? That is the role. And yes, there's some age differences and there's some experience differences, but they are human beings. And so I know that I just said that 3 times, but I think it's a very important thing to remember that they are not anything any more special than you are. But Sheila, go ahead with a concrete advice for folks.
Yes, I think that is an important reminder that they're not gods descended to earth or sent, anything like that, really. But concretely, there are those, and again, this depends on your temperament, depends on the temperament of the legislator. I know some legislators who walk into the room and say, I'm so glad to see you guys because I really care about, I don't know, wind power in the Chesapeake Bay. Did you know that we've got this whole new contract with wind power in the Chesapeake Bay? It's so exciting. And anyway, I just think this is the most important thing for all my constituents. And they go on for 10 of your 15 minutes and you got to say your name and that was it. There are legislators who will do that. In the midst of that, it is good to say, Senator, I really appreciate it. And I'm glad that this is a priority. I'll make a note of that. However, I am here to talk about this issue and I want to respect your time. I don't want to take all morning. So let's refocus on this issue. The I want to respect your time line is true because you very likely only have 15 minutes during session. They're running from one thing to another. So you want to respect their time and you came with an agenda. You came with things you wanted to talk about. That is a perfectly acceptable thing to do. Another thing is that when they raise concerns, those are valid. And you can absolutely say, I hear you, or I agree with you, or I disagree with you, or that's something we're working on, or I don't know where we stand on that. One of the issues we're working on is paid sick days for workers. And I know a delegate who's likely to say, well, I run a small business and that's just really hard. That's a lot of money that I don't know if we have. And you can say, well, I respect that that's hard for small businesses. And, can you know how hard it is for your own workers when they can't take time off. And that sort of thing. So you can kind of bring it back. You want to acknowledge as we've gone through in the earlier points, you want to acknowledge any concerns they have and be, respectful of those, but you do want to be controlling the tone of the conversation, or at least making sure that all your points get said. You can't control everything, obviously. Is that helpful? Does that answer your question, April? Great. Taylor, I see you've got your hand up.
Yes, hi. First, I'm happy to be here. Second, what if you have a lot of like things you would like to talk to the legislator about? For disclosure, I did not realize that we were there to talking to the legislator today. But long story short, my passion area is disability. However, there's so many things in disability that I'm passionate about. So how do I like pick one to talk with the legislator about? Or is there a way to basically do an overall theme and say, hey, these are the issues that I would like to know further, but here are the reasons why I want to talk with you about it?
The short answer is you can do that. I can go more in depth. So, or Katie can if you'd like, but I'll take the first stab at this. So you can do that. You can say disability rights is something that is really important to me. I want you to support bills that support disability rights. There's a little bit of a timing challenge in terms of right now is the General Assembly, and therefore all these thousands of bills are on the table and being voted on every single day. It is really, really helpful in these visits with legislators to have, it's good to give a theme, but it is also helpful if you want their concrete support on something. It's helpful to have a bill number or up to 3 or 4 bill numbers, especially if they're all in the same realm. You could even have, 10 if they were all like along the same lines. Bill numbers are helpful this time of year. Now, Virginia Interfaith Center also organizes meetings with legislators in kind of summer and fall. And those are the meetings where we talk about kind of the broad strokes priorities. You also very likely have more time with them. I have had half-hour, even an hour-long visit with delegates in the fall, in like September, because they're just not running from meeting to meeting. And so you can say, well, hey, we really want to see more economic justice. We really want to see more disability, accessibility for folks who deal with disabilities. Here are some ideas I have about how we could address that. Here's a couple of bills I maybe saw last year or didn't see last year that I'd like you to champion. Will you support this? What does that look like from your end? And you can have more of a process-based conversation, and they can say what they're willing to do concretely, and you can talk about what are broad steps you'd like taken in the next few years. That is a good conversation to have, but not necessarily going to be helpful this week. A helpful conversation this week will be, I support accessibility for people with disabilities and rights for folks with disabilities, and therefore please support whatever bills come across your desk that have to do with those. Or these 3 bills are very meaningful to me. Please support these bills or vote against these bills because they would make life harder for people with disabilities. So that would be, that's my stab. If, and this might be too much for the time frame we have, but I will do just a 5-minute walkthrough in a couple minutes of the legislative information system where you can search for bills and kind of see if something strikes your fancy, or if you had a theme but not a bill, you can check it out there and see if there's something that's on the table that might line up with your interests. Does that make sense? Okay. Well, I think that's a good segue, unless there are any other urgent questions about how to hold your legislative visit. I will go ahead and talk about policy. What is VICPP prioritizing this year, and how to do a little bit of research for yourself about the things you might care about. So yeah, the policy priorities are on the College Day of Action page, And I'm going to go ahead and throw this link in the chat so that you all can access it, but I will walk through it verbally as well. So we've got a few categories this year. One that we've been working on for quite a while is requiring employers to provide paid sick days for their employees. There are over 1 million workers in Virginia who have 0 paid sick days. And therefore, if they get strep throat, they have to choose between paying rent and going to work sick. Paying rent and going to work sick, or staying home and not paying rent. And that is an untenable choice. As we know, in the middle of a pandemic, everyone needs paid sick days. There were some safety net measures that said, oh, if you have COVID, you can have a paid sick day, but there's still nothing for you if you have the flu, if you get strep. This year, we are not going to be able to cover everybody, but 2/3 of grocery store workers have no paid sick days. So we are supporting bills that would cover grocery store workers and some healthcare workers who don't currently have paid sick days. Those bills are actually up in a Senate committee meeting this morning. So I am sending good vibes to the GA right now, but they still haven't been put on the docket in the House of Delegates. So we will be following them, and whatever happens has to be approved by the other chamber in any case. So this bill is going to be voted on this morning, but likely is still in play in the longer run. We've also got another bill that's under our economic justice category, which is about protecting kids by requiring parental permission for children to work in tobacco, which feels like a super low bar, but Virginia does not currently require it. So what a world. Then under the criminal justice reform category, our primary goal is limiting solitary confinement. Currently, last year, Virginia had over 5,000 people in solitary confinement. And the UN defined solitary confinement for more than 15 days as torture. Virginia has no limit to how long you can be in solitary confinement and no guidelines as to what qualifies to put someone into solitary confinement. So you can be put in solitary for a tiny infraction, which is insane and unethical. So we are advocating a bill that would limit solitary confinement to 15 days and put some other safeguards in place around reasons that people might end up in solitary. Also under criminal justice reform, we're supporting the constitutional amendment that would automatically restore voting rights to folks who've completed their sentences after a felony. That has been hit or miss depending on what governor felt like doing which executive orders. This constitutional amendment passed the General Assembly last year, but under Virginia law, you have to pass the General Assembly 2 years in a row before you go and get voted on by the public. So this is the second hearing of this constitutional amendment, and we are really excited to be supporting it. Additionally, we are supporting a bill for counsel at first appearance, which means basically the first time someone accused of a crime goes before a judge, which is usually the bail hearing, they would have a lawyer. You know, the statistics show that people who have a lawyer with them for that first hearing are much more likely to get out on bail and much more likely to have a strong defense at their actual trial, especially if they have a public defender at the actual trial. So this would kind of level the playing field and make things more fair. We want folks to have access to a lawyer at their first appearance before a judge. Then, as several of you mentioned, we are also doing this, we're making a push for an unconscious bias training mandate for folks in the healthcare field. Again, the statistics are crazy. Women of color are something like 3 times more likely to die in childbirth than white women, even after you factor in education and socioeconomic status, and it's appalling. We do have bipartisan support, and it's a really good bill that we'll support. That's another one that's in committee on the Senate side today, so send in prayers. But again, it is also before the House. It's still very much in play in both chambers. And finally, One other piece that we're doing is we're supporting several budget amendments that would increase access to affordable housing. We want more funding in the Virginia's Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which helps build new units. We want funding for rental assistance vouchers, which helps current units and people who might qualify for a federal housing voucher, but are sitting on a wait list, because that wait list is like 6 years long. And then the third affordable housing initiative is a very cool program that we co-authored with the Virginia Poverty Law Center, which is a restorative housing pilot program. It would be some funds to support first-time homebuyers assistance for families who have historically been discriminated against in home buying. And so this attacks things like redlining, crazy credit card, crazy mortgage rates, refusing to sell in certain neighborhoods, deed contracts, all of that. It supports communities of color in particular by giving first-time homebuyers assistance. So those 3 budget amendments are also still very much in play. VICPP also has several legislative priorities around. On the defensive side, we are opposing bills that would stop the minimum wage at $11. It's supposed to get raised to $12 next January. We are opposing bills that would bring back the death penalty, which we finally got rid of last year. We are opposing bills that would allow guns in places of worship. But our primary priorities are positive gains, gaining paid sick days, gaining or limiting solitary confinement to protect folks who are incarcerated, and providing funding for affordable housing, and moving toward justice in medical care by requiring implicit bias training. Are there questions on policy? That was probably the fastest I've done our priorities in a while. Okay. Are there questions on the specific issues or specific bills? I know some of you are in classes where you might be focused on a particular issue or a particular bill. Are there questions and logistics and following things through the legislative process that you want to go through on those? Grand. Then I'm just going to walk you a little bit through the legislative process and the legislative information system. Oh, Katie, go ahead.
Sheila, I want to celebrate. Sometimes we have a tendency to always look forward, but I know that all these students weren't necessarily with us. There was a giant win that happened last year. That was a lot of work of VICPP and social workers and lots and lots of folks that have been advocating for years and years and years. So we haven't talked about that at all, but I want us to mention that last year, what was the giant win, Sheila?
I mean, we had a couple, but ending the death penalty is the one that comes, that's the biggest one.
Ending the death penalty in Virginia, right? That is huge. And that was because of long efforts of groups like this. So I just want to celebrate. Sometimes we look at how hard something is going to be, but sometimes it actually works and we make a really big impact. So just wanted to celebrate that before we got into more nitty gritty.
Absolutely. No, ending the death penalty in Virginia. I haven't been on staff with the VICPP for that long, but I have been part of the fight to end the death penalty for more than 8 years. Like, this is such a big win, such a win for social justice and rights of folks who are incarcerated and all that jazz. So woohoo, agreed. Thank you for that. So how do you accomplish a win like this? Well, I'm going to walk through just kind of the timeline of how a bill becomes a law. You can have Schoolhouse Rock flashbacks. I won't judge you. You might be too young for Schoolhouse Rock, but trust me, it's amazing. So the way this happens, I love it. I love that you showed that in class. The way that it happens to, how a bill becomes law, you start with a legislator writing an issue down that their constituents are having and presenting it to the General Assembly. That's the bill. And then it gets assigned to a committee and then assigned to a subcommittee. So for example, this bill on limiting solitary confinement, was assigned to a committee on rehab and social services, and then assigned to a subcommittee on criminal justice, I think. Then the subcommittee kind of looks at it really in depth. Here's testimony, and votes to either refer it to the full committee or kill it. And the killing it in Virginia has lots of names. It could have been passed by, it could have been laid on the table, or it could have been voted down. But all three of those mean the journey is over. However, this one passes out of subcommittee and it goes to the full committee on rehab and social services. The subcommittee says their recommendation, which is, we thought this was a good bill, we think you should pass it. And then the full committee has a shorter period of time for public comment, usually only 5 minutes on any given bill. And then they vote to pass it along, to refer it to the whole House, or to kill it. At any step in the journey, it can be killed. And so this bill gets referred to the whole House, and then there are 3 readings before the whole House. So the first reading is called the constitutional reading. Nothing happens the first day a bill is read on the House floor. The clerk reads the bill number and the bill summary, and then we move on. It's basically so that the legislators can get in their head what they're going to be talking about tomorrow. Day 2 is the day the magic happens, the day where you have your floor debate, usually. And so on day 2, again, the clerk reads the bill number, the clerk reads the bill summary, and then you ask if anybody has any feedback. The patron says, hey, this is a great idea, here's why I think so. And then there's usually a fair amount of debate. Day 2 is when there's all the content and you can really get a sense of whether this is likely to pass or likely not to pass. And then day 3 is the day when they actually vote on the bill. You'll read the bill number, the bill summary. Sometimes the patron will say one quick thing, and then you'll move to vote on the bill. Let's assume it passes the House. After that, it gets sent over on February 15th is an important day in the legislative calendar because that's called crossover. It's where each chamber can only consider bills that were already passed by the other chamber. It's where every bill that has passed crosses over. So it goes through the entire process again on the Senate side. So starting on February 16th, the Senate will be assigning bills to committees, which will then assign bills to subcommittees. The subcommittees will hear the bills and public comment and testimony. Then the full committee will hear the bill. Then the full Senate will hear the bill. Let's say they pass it. Hooray, we've done it, but not quite, because then the bill gets sent over to the governor's desk, where the governor can sign the bill, veto the bill, or I think there's a third option where he allows it to go into effect without his official approval. I forget what that one's called, but it's not terribly common, but it does happen. If the governor vetoes the bill, in April, the General Assembly reconvenes and can take up any bills the governor has vetoed to and overturn the veto with a 2/3 majority in both houses. It is a long and complicated process. The thing I want you to take away, though, is that committees are incredibly important. Your legislator, the committee your representative serves on, are going to define a lot of the bills that they have actual opinions about, and a lot of the bills they will be voting on and determining whether they pass or die in those early stages in both chambers. So so it's helpful sometimes to pay attention to what bills what committees your legislators serve on. There is an app that can tell you all the committees your legislators serve on if you don't feel like navigating the Virginia General Assembly's website. And honestly, I don't blame you. I have learned to navigate it, but there's a lot of hoops to jump through. So the Virginia General Assembly's website can tell you all the committees your senator and delegate are on, or A ver. Can't remember the name of this app. It is the Verizon Virginia Legislative Directory by Verizon. I will put that in the chat. If you want to follow bills on a long-term basis, it is a great app to have on your phone. And so that can tell you, who is in what committee, whether they're your legislator or not, and can also take you forward into what bills are going to be coming before your particular legislators. Any more questions on policy or process on how a bill becomes a law? Okay, I'm going to do the 30-second review of legislative information system. Y'all are going to have to forgive me for, well, I'll open a new window.
Can I ask, the tips that I went over said that it assumes that there would be talking points. Are we doing talking points?
Apologies. I meant to do talking points. So far, and I apologize because there weren't a ton of folks who came to the Monday night. I didn't get that. There was technical difficulties with that email. It didn't get sent out. Not too many folks emailed me when they set up visitors with their legislators. So if you have a visit set up with your legislator, I can give you more concrete talking points with that particular person, what committees they're on, where their votes might be important.
Sheila, would it be helpful if they put in the chat?
Yes,
who their visitor
put
is?
them in your chat.
Put in the chat where is your legislative visit, or do you have a legislative visit? I mean, if you don't have one, don't put it in the chat. But who is your legislative visit with, and when is it? So if it's in like the next 30 minutes, we will try to get these talking points to you as fast as possible. And please put your email so that we can put that in. Does that work for folks? Okay. And if your visit is in 3 days, then we might get you talking points in 2 days. So.
Yep. Oh, good. Patrick Hope. I will get you that in 15 minutes. Fabulous. Okay. Would you throw your email in the chat? It's on the registration page, but if you throw it in the chat, it'll make my life a little more straightforward.
They've got Cree deeds in 15 minutes too.
Great. Okay. Yep. I know where he's key as well. Great. Well, I'm going to take just a moment while you're putting these in the chat and show you the legislative information system. So this is LIS, Legislative Information System, lis.virginia.gov. It has, I think, roughly 20 years of history of going back to since 1995, 25 years of every single bill that was introduced. Knowing that we only want to look at what's current in the 2022 session, let's go down to session tracking bills and resolutions. You can search by bill number if you want to look at a particular bill. And you can see I've done this a lot in the last 2 days. Or if there's a particular sponsor is likely to have introduced something you're interested in. If there's a committee that you think would be considering bills you like, or by subject. So these are good categories to use. As we move forward, the passed, the failed, sent to conference, and in the governor, these are kind of the later steps. Introduced is in House of Origin, passed is helpful post crossover, passed and failed are helpful post crossover, and then conference is when a bill passes both House and Senate, but with different amendments. And so those are helpful. So, okay, let's imagine if I have a bill number, and we'll just go with it, SB 108, because I know exactly what that is. That's about prohibiting use of isolated confinement. Really, it limits the use of solitary. We can see that the Senate version was referred to the Committee on Rehab and Social Services, reported from Rehab and Social Services with 8 yes notes and 6 no votes. Finance and Appropriations had to approve it. They passed it 12 yes and 4 no. It had its first reading on the Senate floor yesterday, and it's likely to come to the debate on the Senate floor today. So we can see exactly where we are in the process and get a good summary of what the bill is about. If you don't have a bill number, going by subject is hit or miss because there are a lot of odd subjects. The charters. Now that's about city and town charters, but like a lot of things could be under there that might cross-pollinate in terms of topics. So bill subject index can be helpful, but can be confusing. I'm going to go back again. By committee is actually, I find, a more helpful way of searching for something if I don't know what bill I'm looking for or who introduced it. So by committee, these are the committees in the House and the Senate. And you can kind of get a sense of like, oh, okay, I want this bill on paid sick days. So that's under Commerce and Labor in the Senate. And, you know, commerce is where people being employed, and therefore it's under Commerce and Energy in the House. Okay, cool. I click through there. Now we have a list of the subcommittees. Oh, that's not helpful because the House subcommittees are numbered. Let's go to Commerce and Labor. Click through there and you notice, okay, we've got the one subcommittee on energy, which is probably about, you know, literal energy, power and coal versus electric and all that jazz. And then labor and employment. Well, the one I want is likely the labor and employment one. So I would just click there. And then I can read all of the legislation in that subcommittee. And there are not that many that have not already been passed or failed from that subcommittee. We've got paid family leave. We've got providing paid sick leave. And that's the one I was looking for. So here we are. So there are so this is a really helpful tool if you have a broad strokes idea, but don't know what bill you want. And so this says paid sick leave and it's SB 624. Fabulous. The other one that's paid sick leave is SB 352. So now I know 2 bills that I want my senator to support. Okay, it is 10:01. I really appreciate all of you. Thank you so much for participating. I'm excited for the rest of the day. I am going to screenshot these list of legislators so that I don't lose it. Are there any questions? I understand some of you have legislative meetings very soon, but are there any questions before we go about meeting with legislators, about policy, about process? Great. Well, I, again, am so excited for those of you who are about to be meeting with legislators and those of you who are going to be doing that later in the week. Y'all have a great day, and I will see you in an hour to talk about how it is we pick our issues.